From the library of the New York Stock Exchange at the corner of Wall and Broad Streets in New York City, you're inside the Ice House, our podcast from Intercontinental Exchange on markets, leadership, and vision in global business. The dream drivers that have made the NYSE an indispensable institution of global growth for over 225 years. Each week, we feature stories of those who hatch plans, create jobs, and harness the engine of capitalism. Right here, right now at the NYSE and at ICE's exchanges and clearinghouses around the world. And now welcome inside the Ice House. Here's your host, Josh King of Intercontinental Exchange.
Somewhat overshadowed by the pandemic a year ago, 2020 was the 50th anniversary of the inaugural Earth Day back in 1970 and organized by Senator Gaylord Nelson of Wisconsin. It's hard to argue that any Earth Day since the first has had such a profound impact. That day led to the creation of the Environmental Protection Agency here in the U.S. and passage of the National Environmental Education Act, the Occupational Safety and Health Act, and the Clean Air Act. Now, fast forward 50 years, and if governments and corporations continue to focus on the issues, Earth Day this year could go down as a similar watershed moment for protecting the planet by expanding into a year-round global observance. The temporary reduction in emissions and pollution as a result of the lockdowns, combined with the need to respond to accelerating global warming, has created the momentum to change business and society behaviors really forever. Investors, both the retail ones and institutional, are moving in that direction with 1 in every 3 invested dollars put to work by an ESG strategy. Oh, and those dollars saw a 5% better return in 2020 than traditional investments. The issue that stakeholders are facing now is the lack of transparency in the ESG space. To quote one of our recent guests on this show, who in turn was quoting Peter Drucker, "What you measure gets managed." But despite strong financial reporting standards, there are still few standards for ESG activities. Picking up on this moment, the Biden administration has introduced a broad set of executive and legislative approaches to transform how the country handles and regulates climate issues. One action that Wall Street took note of, and our own Hope Jarkowski spoke about on this show just a few weeks ago, is the SEC's creation of a climate and ESG task force in its division of enforcement. The SEC itself said it would use sophisticated data analysis to mine and assess information across registrants to identify potential violations. And woe be to the violators. Our guest today, Mark Hawkins, knows a thing or two about reporting the real hard numbers of ESG. As Salesforce's chief financial officer, he's also served as the head of its appropriately named Earth Force, overseeing the company's year-round service to the planet. During 6 years as CFO, Mark also happened to steward the company's market cap, increasing sixfold to reach a 2020 high of $248 billion. During his tenure, he showed that the modern CFO must meet the needs of all stakeholders. Our conversation with Mark Hawkins on making business a platform for change, the multifaceted responsibilities of the modern CFO, and what's next for this renowned tech executive. That's all coming up right after this.
Whether it's markets, exchanges, or networks, connection makes everything possible. The connection between data and technology, innovation and expertise, and most of all, between people and opportunity. For over 20 years, ICE has transformed markets, products, and processes to make things work better, faster, smarter. From modernizing energy and commodity trading to revolutionizing the bond markets. Whether it's the world's largest stock exchange or the dream of home ownership, we do more than see the big picture. We create it. You may not know our name, but we bet you know our network. ICE. Make the connection.
Our guest today, Mark Hawkins, is Salesforce's president and CFO Emeritus. That's NYSE ticker symbol CRM for Salesforce. Salesforce announced on its third quarter 2020 earnings call in December that Mark was retiring in January and would serve out the rest of this year in an advisory role. He previously served as the CFO of Autodesk and Logitech, began his career with Hewlett Packard, that's NYSE ticker symbol HPQ, and Dell, ticker symbol Dell. In addition, Mark has served on the New York Stock Exchange's Listed Company Advisory Board, where he helped guide our exchange's ESG efforts. Mark, welcome inside the Ice House.
It's such a pleasure to be with you, and I really appreciate the opportunity, Josh, to be here. We have had a great relationship with the NYSE for more than 20 years, and I just can't thank you enough for the partnership. It's really a pleasure to be here.
We've loved having you at the big board, Mark. Salesforce has released an annual ESG governance stakeholder report that contains all of the company's ESG efforts and the metrics going over several years. What are your thoughts on the more active role that the SEC is taking in investigating how companies report that information that I just talked about?
I really appreciate you calling out our stakeholder impact report. We've been doing that, Josh, for 8 years. And for 8 years, we've thought that the ESG topic was important and that topic would rise and continue to rise in importance, and it certainly has and certainly is. I think the one thing that we look at there is we not only put out and try to be very comprehensive in our disclosures on ESG, but we actually go as far as to have engaged Ernst & Young to actually audit that, because we think it's very important to make sure that those facts stand in the same way any other facts we put out stand. And that just shows our commitment to really being serious about ESG, and it has been for 8 years. We believe that business is the greatest platform for change. When business mobilizes, it can move faster than just about any organization, and it can have a quicker positive impact on so many different dimensions. And certainly this critical dimension of ESG that's rising in expectation. Our shareholders have been clear. Our employees have been clear. Our customers have been clear. Our partners have been clear that this is a topic of rising importance. So when we come back to, talking about, how we should address this and how now regulatory bodies are addressing this, I think business has the opportunity to lead from the front and really rally, move fast, and really contribute. And of course, there could be other organizations that are involved, but I think if business leads strongly from the front, we can make more progress, we can deliver more benefit even sooner.
As ESG reporting for public companies becomes more systematic and regulated, do you think the responsibility for meeting those standards should actually fall under the CFO's quarterly reporting duties?
I think there's a lot of sensibility to do that. I think it can make a lot of sense. I find it to be, very synergistic when we get together and try to understand all the different needs of our stakeholders. In a modern CFO, one that needs to not only report and deal with the classic financial reports that need to be put out in the interactions with the very important shareholder, which is one of the critical constituencies, but there are other constituencies that the modern CFO needs to address as well. And to be well-versed in ESG, I think is a really key part. So yeah, I think it would make a ton of sense in that respect.
So whether you're tracking ESG metrics or your growth projections, the technology available to CFOs has evolved so greatly over time. You've spent your career with companies developing the tools needed for business, beginning with Hewlett Packard. I wonder, Mark, coming out of Michigan State, did you disappoint your long-rooted Michigan family by passing up an opportunity to work at GM?
I did, in fact. You are well informed. What was interesting is GM was my highest dollar offer. And for a person that worked nights for 4 years to get to school, even on a scholarship, dollars were important. But I decided instead, where my family hailed from Michigan for generations, to go with a company called Hewlett Packard that had just finished a $3.1 billion revenue year. That was the beginning of an amazing journey. I worked with them for a little over 18, almost 19 years. We had crested around $50 billion, and I was involved as one of 7 business unit CFOs as we spun out Agilent Technologies. I'm actually proud to say that Agilent Technologies today, their CEO, I mentored for years, and his name is Mike McMullen, and he's just a wonderful leader.
When you think of Hewlett Packard, you think of Hewlett and Packard in the garage, starting that business in Silicon Valley and really defining Silicon Valley. But you're in Colorado Springs. What did you learn over those first years at HP and the University of Colorado that prepared you ultimately to head across the pond in search of a more experience and a green Jaguar?
What I learned most importantly is I learned how critical it is to really be aligned to the values of the company, to have a sense of both the short-term plan and the long-term plan. I learned the power of really digging in and really focusing on excellence and continuous improvement, which really got me to really internalize that. And there's a phrase I use in every audience, and that is better, better, never done. No matter how much you've accomplished, no matter how much you've achieved as a business or as an individual or as an organization, we need to be forward-leaning and we need to go to the future. And that was incredibly valuable as I began to go, actually, Josh, to take my overseas assignment. I was in my early 30s. I thought that would be important. And the story behind the Green Jaguar is actually quite fun. My boss said to me that, hey, if you can get this company division up to about 250 million, it was kind of pretty close to a startup mode, that particular division of HP, that we'll get you a Green Jaguar, which was quite popular in the UK. And when I left, it was well above that. And when I got home and I was back in the Bay Area, I opened up a little box, Josh, on my desk, and I opened it up, and there's one of those model Green Jaguars and a beautiful brass plaque on it that talked about the achievements, where the business, well crested $1 billion not long after that. And the good news was, whereby it was not a real Green Jaguar that I had envisioned, there were stock options in there that worked out really well.
Talking about better, never done, Mark, I saw you retweet your old boss, Michael Dell, a few weeks ago, saying that he started his firm 37 years ago with $1,000, revenues in 1984 of $6 million compared to, $94 billion last year. Was it a no-brainer to make the move to Dell after 18 years at HP?
Well, it was. It really was a no-brainer. I had admired Dell immensely from afar, and we had been through a period where we just split HP for the first time ever with the spin of Agilent Technologies. Ned Barnhold, the CEO, and Bob Walker, the CFO, led that charge, and I was one of the 7 business unit CFOs in the company trying to support that. And so there was a lot of change happening. And there's another little twist, Josh, that my wife's parents lived in Austin, Texas, and we had lived overseas. We had lived in Colorado. We had been everywhere except for within any proximity of our family. And so that was a wonderful extra chapter. But I learned so much at Dell in terms of just the excellence in execution, yet another entrepreneurial set of success patterns, if you will, to be able to learn from and to study and to try to observe and to try to continually take my own skill set to a higher and higher level. But it was a wonderful chapter, and I have the great pleasure today to still work with the Dell team, including Michael, where I'm on the board of SecureWorks, and he's the chairman.
I'm staring at you right now, Mark, through a Logitech external PC camera. Logitech became your next stop, your first, I think, top CFO gig. You also oversaw IT when you were there, an area that you'd continue to oversee when you got to Autodesk. I was surprised to find out, Mark, that nearly 40% of CFOs wear the IT hat as well. You worked for tech companies for your career, but how'd you gain the knowledge that you needed to oversee IT operations in addition to the balance sheet?
For any executive in a modern corporation, and certainly in today's competitive environment, if one's not learning, they're getting behind. If one's not improving, they're getting behind. And that was my appetite. We had situations where there'd be a tough challenge. And, some of my mentors taught me early, don't be afraid to run into the fire. A lot of people run away from the fire. I'm happy to run into the fire and try to help and serve the company in any way I think about it, that I can. And I heard an old Navy saying that really stuck with me, which is shipmate self. And when the ship needs something, you go in there and help them in whatever way you can. And if you do a good job, more opportunity comes. And so that happened. I thoroughly enjoyed learning IT and how to really have a positive impact there. The Logic Tech team was awesome. Yet another founder with Daniel Burrell on the board, and yet another iconic company. And just they had Swiss engineering, and they had global manufacturing.
You're talking about running into fires, Mark, but there's this reputation that CFOs stand for the chief no officer of a company. But I think for many of our shared acquaintances, this clearly is not your style. Did you have mentors that really drilled in this commercial mindset that you have?
I think one of the opportunities that I got early on was the criticality of the customer and how to get deeply involved in the customer. When you do that, you really can't abstract yourself away from the way the business really runs and what needs to be improved to better satisfy the customer. I'll just pick Dell as an example, where we went from number 6 to number 1 in the U.S. consumer PC business. And we were making so much progress that we asked our finance team after the normal day to get on the call centers to take orders for Dell computers when we were configuring, for those that didn't go all the way through Dell.com. And every one of my team needed to learn about the financing program. They needed to understand the nature of the configuration. They needed to understand what the customer needed. They needed to understand what was on their mind. And that changed our team. Our team could walk into any room and truly understand the business. And that was then. And today, one of the things that's interesting in my job and has been for the nearly past 7 years is to meet with customers at least every single day. And at Salesforce, there is nobody in the executive committee that's not deeply, constantly engaged in the customer. My commentary to the entire Salesforce organization is, let's make the customer successful first, and our success will come. Take care of the customer first. It's one of our values, and it brings me to the point that I always like to say that values drive value, and certainly customer success is one of our top values, in addition to trust, innovation, and equality.
How does that actually work? I mean, you're the company's CFO. Are there certain things that you bring to a customer meeting that helps that customer out? Where does that chemistry start?
Well, first it starts where I was, as a member of the executive committee, I'm one of those that actually, as a customer prior to joining Salesforce, actually from the beginning implemented Salesforce because IT worked for me, and we went from an idea to a full successful implementation. So I understood what it's like to be on the other side of the equation. Number two, having, a global network of business leaders that I've been engaged with for 40 years, there's a lot of relationships, whether it's at the World Economic Forum, whether it's in New York, whether it's in San Francisco, London, Tokyo, wherever the case might be, there's a lot of longstanding relationships, and I would be naturally pulled into that. I'm also executive sponsor for a number of accounts, as every single member of the executive committee would be. So at Salesforce, what's kind of cool, and I've always been inspired by, is that everybody gets how critical customer success is. And just to give you an example, Josh, there is nobody, this is what it's like to be with a founder-led company. There is nobody, not a single employee at Salesforce, that doesn't annually get certified to tell the company message. I mean, certified in front of people that they have to present to. And when I say that, they need to understand our values. They need to understand our products. They need to understand our focus on the customer success and our roadmap and all the things that we do and offer. And when I say everybody, Josh, I want to be clear. Our payroll clerks, our receptionists, our accounts payable, anybody in the company needs to do that. And that's the beginning of having a culture of focus on customer success. It's more about telling somebody that this isn't about the transaction of today. This is about a relationship over the long period of time. I give customers my cell number. You ever have a problem, you call me. I just had a major customer like three work days ago set up a 30-minute meeting just to thank me because I honored that when they asked for some help. That's what we do. That's where our passion comes from. That is our North Star, one of our values of customer success. So I think a CFO who thinks in a more narrow view is missing the opportunity. And Josh, I'll tell you something interesting. I've had the great pleasure. There's been 5 CFO forums at the World Economic Forum, and I've had the great honor and privilege to host all 5. But one time, actually, Tom Farley was there.
Yep.
Tom spoke.
I remember a couple of years ago.
Yeah, and he was there with a fireside chat with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I am obsessed about, learning. And actually, he and Larry Fink were there.
Yeah.
And they were my 2 great guests. And I asked Tom, I said, I want to learn from you. You've seen so many CFOs, so many CEOs. What is the pattern of success? I'm obsessed by patterns, Josh. And Tom was very clear. He said, I can see it. The ones that are successful take a wide view of their job. And the ones that are less impact are very, very narrow. In today's environment, and it leads to my view of kind of the evolving role of the CFO, Josh, is today's modern CFO needs to serve their company by taking great care of the shareholder, for sure, but also great care of the customer, great care of the employees, great care of the partner relationships, great care of being engaged in the community. Because to me, that's how you're going to create generational companies. That's how you're going to create generational wealth creation, not wealth administration. You're going to really build something.
There's been recent news this week. Prince Harry got his appointment as BetterUp's chief impact officer. Elon Musk, in one of their SEC filings, Tesla named him the techno king of the company. The entire C-suite seems to be getting more specialized. You're talking to me, Mark, about the evolution of the CFO with increased responsibilities. I'm curious, going back to Michigan, was there something about the way you were brought up by your parents and the environment in which you grew up that probably seeded your abilities to be the kind of executive you became?
Some of the best advice I ever received was from my mother. It's all about the people you hang around with and that you surround yourself around with, and be around people that are productive and that have aspirations and understand that great leaders lift people up when they rise. And so there were, some tremendous lessons and not being afraid of hard work and challenging yourself. I remember getting up at, when I was 11, getting in the back of a pickup truck at 4:30 in the morning and go driving a tractor for about 5 hours when I was 11 years old. And hard work was kind of what was expected. And one of the people on our board, Sandy Robertson, who's, a legend for sure, in so many ways, basically I asked him, Sandy, is there a lesson I can learn from you? And he said, absolutely, Mark. The harder you work, the luckier you get. And I think there was a lot of that. I think growing up and appreciating, values and respecting people, to me is so important because I think at the end of the day, you're making things happen with people. You're building relationships with people, and trust is my number one value. And I think, when you live in a small community, you know how important it is to always, keep your word, and your, say-do ratio needs to be super high. Education is the ultimate transformation for every one of us. I went to school in the day and worked at night all at Michigan State. And my next 4 years, I was working at HP and then going to school at night at University of Colorado. To me, that just seemed like a natural thing from where I grew up. If you have an opportunity, you run through that door.
What other strategies do you bring to bear every day to learn and to balance the competing needs of stakeholders? You talk about meeting with customers every day, but you have so many other stakeholders, whether it's regulators, employees, your fellow members of the management committee. You've got to have a certain strategy that you take when you walk in the door of Salesforce building.
Well, at Dell, one of the things that I learned that was incredibly helpful was this notion that, hey, the business is growing north of 20%. Are you? And what are you doing? And so one of the things that I've always done, Josh, is I've always tried to step back, and every year between Christmas and New Year's, I put down a set of goals for myself. But one thing I've really tried to do is always recalibrate. Like, this year is different. Like, the facts and circumstances are different. The business is different. My team is different. How am I scaling up? How am I adjusting? How am I what were things that I did last year that I could have my team do, and then I go do things that only I can do to help the company, and keep recalibrating and refactoring what is my job in a rapidly growing company. Today, we're a Dow 30 company. When I started, we had just finished being a $4 billion annual sales company. And we were, going to change it rapidly. And I think one has to constantly raise their own expectations, refactor, adjust, and be very intentional about that and be very strategic about that. And so I think that is super critical. I look at my calendar like a portfolio allocation of financial dollars. And I actually have my assistant, run some things for me, and I measure that and see how I'm reshaping that. And am I in the place where I can help the company the most? I like to, talk about, I've said this to a lot of people when I do career mentoring. I say, think about yourself like a small company. Let's just call it Josh Incorporated. And for Josh, for any small company or big company, you need to ship a lot. If you're not shipping goods and services, your company has a problem right away. If you've ever had a stop shipment in a company, that's a 5-alarm fire. And you have to ship really good services and quality. And it has to be modern services and quality. It has to be services and quality that meet the need and are competitive in the world. You then need to do research and development. If you're not doing research and development, I would not invest in any company that doesn't do research and development. So why would you not invest in your research and development, if you follow my metaphor? Mm-hmm. You have to do a little marketing. You can't do too much because, you got a lot of things you have to invest in, but you have to do some to get your value proposition out. And then you have to trade off short-term income and long-term market cap and enterprise value. What are you really trying to do? And some of the most important career decisions I've ever made were to have delayed gratification on the long-term market cap that would be good for the company, have a board of advisors, keep your credit good. There's a lot of parallels in your brand and your values, because if you don't decide them, somebody else will. And so I think that kind of conceptual idea directs us to be entrepreneurs, and each of us should be entrepreneurs and lean into it and keep, chasing the future as opposed to over enjoying the past. I mean, we can enjoy the work and the accomplishments that we've all achieved together. And I am so proud of, for example, right now at Salesforce, what we've achieved together. And yet it's all about the future. And that's, better, never done. That's the tension that I'm trying to always push on.
You're also a lifelong teacher, and you're talking about your work with the World Economic Forum. I think you wrote an article in 2018 for WEF, Why CFOs Need to Rethink What It Means to Create Value. Why did you begin to look at stakeholders differently, and how did the numbers back up what I think Mark Benioff and others have termed this idea of stakeholder capitalism?
For sure. I think that, we've had discussions in a lot of different forums, but, there's shareholder focus and stakeholder focus. And I actually see those coming together. I think the difference is the timing. And for me, if you break it down in classic economics, whether it's Milton Friedman or whoever you want to look at, you stand back and say, okay, let's just think about customer. Let's take them one at a time. Give me an example in your mind, just rhetorically, of somebody that's treated customers really, really well and what the outcome looks like, and somebody that has not treated the customer really, really well and is very short term and rough in the sense of, being very transactional. And I would say to build a generational company, it's no question, treat them well. Okay, employees. How many examples can you think over the lifetime of your business career where employees were treated badly and employees were treated like a destination employer, where they're the center of your innovation. They're the engine behind the great things that happen in your company. I can tell you how that, my experience of how that ends up. You take a look at your partners. And again, how many people will, I remember a great saying by Dave Packard where somebody had got a deal and a partner made an error and we were going to profit off it. And David tore up the PO and said, go back and strike a fair and tough deal. It's like, wow, treat your partners right. They will be there when you need them. And then of course you come down to your community, or, and look at, people who have zero interest in the community and those that have actually leaned into the community, and the community leans into them when they need it. And then I come down to the environment. Think of the companies that absolutely wreaked havoc on the environment and how that ended versus ones that didn't. So to me, this is actually not only the right thing to do, but it actually promotes your success in the long term. And I think there's lots of math that supports that. But my view is that that resonates deeply with the employee population today, deeply with the customers. You called out the investors and the partners, but I also think you got to another point is the timing. If you want to create wealth creation and not do wealth administration, you have to have a view of what you're really trying to achieve over a longer period of time. And my view is I don't want to be known for maniacal execution to a 90-day plan. I want to be known for maniacal short-term execution to a 90-day plan, to a 90-day execution to a long-term plan. So it's short-term execution to a long-term plan, not short-term execution to a short-term plan. If you take a longer view, as somebody that's championed the long-term plan for the company for the last nearly 7 years, that has been deeply on my mind. Well, at the same time, having to execute each and every day, each and every quarter, each and every year, that is the expectation. And we love to execute, but we want to execute to a more thoughtful plan. And that, I think, that plus thinking about the broader set of constituencies, I believe lands you to a much better place over the long term. We did the 1-1-1 model for giving back to society from the very first day we started the company. And, giving 1% of our market cap away originally to philanthropy, 1% of nearly 60,000 employees get 7 paid days to give back to society, and 1% of our product to over 60,000 NGOs. And now over 9,000 companies have adopted the 1% pledge. Business is the greatest platform for change. And that certainly makes us compatico with industry and community. And I think it's so interesting when you see now, 22 years later, the Business Roundtable is signing up for the same thing. We didn't start this last year. This is at the beginning and the conception of the company.
And yet, this 90-day period is so ingrained to those of us who work in publicly traded companies, who watch CNBC for much of the day. The debate around quarterly reporting and its influence on the ability to plan long-term and navigate through rough waters. You can now speak freely as a former CFO. Does quarterly reporting have any impact on stakeholder capitalism?
I actually have a view that might be different than you expect. My view is not so much the quarterly reporting. I think that's fine because I think that keeps a focus on execution. I think the bigger issue is have companies taken a longer view, a longer term plan of what they're trying to achieve, and have they aligned their constituencies, including their board of directors and their shareholders, to their longer term plan. Because if you have done that, the fact that you're doing quarterly reporting, people are not getting, confused about what you are trying to achieve over a longer period of time. And you can, of course, show the progress along the way. But I think the bigger point to me is, have you really convinced people about your long-term plan? And if you have, I think the quarterly reporting is really a secondary issue, in my opinion. Because, by the way, here's the honest truth. There's going to be a consensus whether somebody guides or not. You can have surprises in semi-annual reporting. You could have surprises over an annual reporting. I think the bigger issue is alignment on what is trying to be achieved to set expectations properly. And then quarterly reporting, I think, is a secondary issue, in my opinion.
After the break, Mark Hawkins, Salesforce's president and CFO Emeritus, and I are going to discuss his tenure at Salesforce and his leadership principles. That's all right after this.
Historical data can offer insight into the direction of markets. Yet data processing, collection, and storage can be challenging and costly. To simplify your data access needs and help find efficiencies, we launched ICE Data Vault, a cloud-based platform that enables you to access tick history for global exchanges, as well as our proprietary data, sourced from our real-time feed. Backtest your trading strategies to assess performance and viability, conduct transaction cost analysis, and support compliance requirements. Input data into surveillance systems to help detect and prevent abusive or illegal trading activities. Access over 10 years of deep tick history across asset classes. Get tick data for an entire market or on an underlying list of instruments. Access additional securities as needed, with flexible delivery options to complement your workflow. Simplify your historical data management with ICE Data Vault.
Welcome back. Before the break, Mark Hawkins, Salesforce's president and CFO Emeritus, and I were discussing his career and really how the CFO role has changed over time. Mark, when you were thinking about that move from Autodesk to Salesforce, I understand that you weighed the opportunity with your wife and children. I have 2 kids, one of whom is now away at school. And while I've become closer to my daughter after this year of remote learning while she's been in the house, I miss these long-term hikes with my son, which I know is one of your treasured rituals. Do you see the career trajectory as a family endeavor, and how have they been supportive of you as you've made all these moves that we've been talking about, Colorado to the UK to Texas and California?
It's definitely a family endeavor. I met my wife, Laura, when we were 20 years old. We got married at 22. And, please don't ask me what I was thinking at that time, Josh, but it's been wonderful. I have 2 sons, and I always have felt that, as a family unit, that this is our journey together as a team. And, I remember the opportunity when Salesforce had reached out, and Autodesk was an incredible experience, which we can get into around, how to deal with a turnaround, how to deal with the fears and the error around the great financial crisis and all that. But, it turned out we repositioned the company. We got it to grow again. We got it to be profitable again. We repositioned it strategically for the cloud. And so there was a lot of hard work done. And, the share price went from, mid-teens to, I guess today north of 250, or depending on any given day. But I really deeply enjoyed the Autodesk team and the experience after we got through the harrowing part of it. And when Salesforce reached out, we all talked, and then we said, hey, look, here are the pros, here are the cons. And, you guys are the stakeholders in this. What do you think? And my sons both weighed in, my wife both weighed in, and they, said, we're in, let's do it. And so I called my brother, and I said, I'm one of 5 boys, and I called one of my brothers and just said, I wanted to talk to him, and just said, hey, I didn't tell him the company, just said, I'm thinking about something, and, it might be a change. And he asked me a great question, Josh. He said, hey, Mark, do you have another hill to climb? And I thought, you know what? I do. And I do because I want to learn. I want to grow. I want to continue to, scale and take it to another level. And I always remember something, Josh, that really impacted me. I was talking to somebody I had great respect for, and we were reviewing a hire of somebody, and they had 20 years of experience. And I said, look, this person has 20 years of experience. And the person came back to me and they said, do they have 20 years of experience, or do they have 1 year 20 times? And I was like, whoa, now that's a thought, And so I've always been mindful in my learning, in my growing. Can I bring more to the table? Can I run into the fire? Can I would be very comfortable in one situation, right? Like in a situation where you have a turnaround where the outcome is really good, you can imagine the relationships with the board and everybody, it's like things are good, and yet you can put yourself right in the mix of being brand new and having to reprove yourself each and every day. And I never want to rest on my laurels. I always want to be forward leaning and learn from people and be around great people, be around the best people so I can learn and contribute. And so that was part of that dialogue. But and by the way, when I decided after 40 years in technology, in 15 years as a public CFO, and having the opportunity to work with such iconic companies and iconic leaders, to go into chapter 2, extensive discussion with my family, not about I have to always be very careful. I'm super confidential about not talking about work, But I just talked about, there'll be a day when I'll do something different. And then you would conceptually talk about it without, giving any kind of specifics about anything. And my family's like, hey, you've done everything, that we could ever imagine to help our family. Go enjoy chapter 2, where you're going to get to learn even more. And so chapter 2 is going to be super fun. And we'll talk about that at some point. But
we'll end up our discussion on chapter 2, I'm sure, Mark. But sticking on sort of the last sort of subchapter of chapter 1, I think Salesforce has this well-earned reputation for being a value-driven company. We talked about that a little bit earlier, and it's focused on what you call Ohana. You retweeted Mark Benioff's photo of the Salesforce management team doing that outdoor earnings call. As you look back at the past year, which has to be one of the weirdest in that 40-year career that you've been talking about, what stands out about the company's COVID-19 response and its ongoing efforts?
Well, it was a year like no other year. And I would say that having been a Section 16 officer navigating through the great financial recession, that was a warm-up to what we were dealing with here. And I'll share with you, Josh, both some of the experiences of it, but also the learnings to take forward, because it is about the future. So it's like what actually happened, and then the future. As a company, my experience, both in the great financial recession, but certainly in the middle of this, historic situation, is when you're making 1,000 decisions a minute, not literally, but kind of felt like it, more from a feeling standpoint. One of the best things you can be guided by is having a clear vision and clear values. And so when things hit, we knew what we needed to do. The first thing we needed to do is take care of our employees, our Ohana. And so, and with Mark's great leadership, Mark Benioff, we made a call that was a bit unprecedented, even on the West Coast of the United States. And we pulled people in very early to say, you work from home. So all of our employees, I'm saying all, virtually like 99% of our employees work from home almost immediately. And we didn't know how long this would be. And so we immediately spun that up and said, employees, take care of them. We started having mental health specialists come on, and we had all hands calls for 55 to 60,000 employees every single week. We answered every question people could have. We had epidemiologists on. We had Buddhist monks to teach meditation. I remember one person sent me a picture. Their desk was an ironing board, and they put the rack on top of that, and they were going, and it was quite a moment. So taking care of the employees and spending even when we didn't have that in the budget. Then we turned and said, how are we taking care of our customers? And we were doing all kinds of things to, literally, pivot so quickly that we canceled. We have these things called world tours, where like the Sydney World Tour I presented, there was probably 15,000 people live. This is a big event, and we do them all over the world. Within roughly 7 days, we went from a live session planned, canceled that, completely reprogrammed the whole thing, and did it all on virtual within about 7 days, and had even more attendance, and were able to pivot. So we were trying to take care of the customer. We were trying to take care of how to serve them, how to support them. And then, of course, to be true to our values, we had to figure out how to help the community. And, we had to take care of our sales team, where all the plans were adjusted. We had to take care of our community. And honestly, Josh, this is one of the most stressful times during the entire pandemic, where I remember being at home. We were working 14 hours a day on the weekend, dealing with all the other stuff. But then Mark said, we got to get protective equipment. People are not moving fast enough. And so with the help of, some really awesome executives, Ryan Ate, a member of our team, our chief procurement officer, a number of different people, Amy Weaver and I were on the line, and we literally were working through all the logistics to find 60 million pieces of protective equipment that we paid for. We had airshipped to over 300 hospitals when we had doctors that just didn't have protective equipment. So we did a lot of things. And in our Q1, when we went to talk to the investor, this is about taking a longer term view of what's happening. We basically said we've made these investments at a time that was so critical to our employees, to our customers, to our community. these are investments, and I truly believe they're investments. We worked with customers in other ways to try to help them survive during this period of time, and I think someday that goodness will come forward. Our approach is, how do we together rally with our values and actually go get something done and achieve our, including our financial goals and things of that nature. And we ended up learning things about, when is travel necessary that we'll take forward? What is the optimal real estate requirement? We will take that forward. What do our employees want in the future? How can we better support our customer? How can we do demand generation in new and different ways? And we've talked about all this publicly, but the lessons learned, have been so powerful. Even having, more investor conferences, video, and I remember, being conflicted, like just before everything really hit, should I go down to a particularly popular investor session down in Florida? And I talked to my audit chair and talked to Mark, and we said, probably doesn't make sense. They want me to meet all these people. And so I called in, talked to every single one of them, and they were thinking like that was like smart. And so I think if you're willing with beginner eyes to keep taking the facts and circumstances and then trying to wring out some learnings, we're gonna benefit over the long term, and we're gonna try to pass that on to our customers in every way.
You've got the iconic Salesforce tower that occupies so much of the San Francisco skyline, and I'm sure that's a lot of commercial real estate that has been idle over the past year. You're talking about your colleagues who are making desks out of ironing boards. How do you think remote work that is either a temporary response over the last 12 months or a permanent evolution of work is going to impact this relationship between businesses, employees, those investors in Florida, and communities like San Francisco?
Yeah, here's my thing that I learned, in this new all digital work from anywhere environment, the world has changed. And it's not to say that we won't have, people will want to work in buildings when it's all safe to do, for sure. I just think, and I've talked to a lot of people in my chair from a lot of really well-known companies, and I would say the center of gravity is what I would call a hybrid model, where people will work from the office. But I think people will also want some degree of flexibility where maybe they don't do that 5 days a week. Maybe they do that, in a fractional time. Maybe there is, it's different. Instead of assigned seats, there's ways to better utilize the office space and yet keep a huge focus on the customer, because it's one of our core values. Customer, focus on collaboration, focus on the ability to support a changing model and maybe even changing expectations in the world. But we also learn from employees that where you work, when you ask a person, Josh, where they work, what people used to say is, I work at 415 Mission Street, Salesforce Tower. You know what people say now? A lot of our customers and other people, they say, I work in Slack. Where do you work? The all digital work from anywhere environment is changing for sure the world. And I think that, that is a precursor of what's to come in the world. And I think there'll be a hybrid model is my anticipation. But certainly, one thing we saw is those companies that were digitally prepared, did a whole lot better than those that didn't.
You mentioned Slack. It was one of our favorite events on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange, 2019, one of our second direct listing after Spotify. Yeah. You have overseen the acquisitions, among so many others, Mark, of Tableau, MuleSoft, Slack, increasing Salesforce's market cap by $50 billion, pushing the company into the largest 50 public companies in the world. Came across several headlines as we were doing the research for the show, connecting your departure maybe with the Slack acquisition. Was the deal a good bookend to your tenure, or just coincidental timing?
Definitely coincidental timing, and I'm so proud of what we've done with Slack. I've always take the view it's all about the future. We know like where we all work in the future is digitally, not exclusively. Again, just to be clear. I think Slack is, when we think about what Slack can do for our customers, which is why we bought it. When we buy M&A, Josh, it's always so interesting. People say, like, did you get the idea from an investment banker? Did you get it here? Did you get it there? We get it from a customer. when we bought Demandware, when we bought ExactTarget, when we bought MuleSoft. MuleSoft is a great story where Brett Taylor went around the world on a customer tour. We quantify what they needed. The number one ask was data integration. We went out and bought MuleSoft, right away. And Slack is just the latest version of that. But for me, again, 40 years in technology is hard to find as people, and to have the tenure of a CFO to be 15 years in the public markets. I guess the Wall Street Journal has some stats that say it's 4.5, 5 years, something like that. So it's been, I'm a marathon runner, by the way. I love to do that as a personal thing, and this has been a marathon, and it's just more. The time was something that was right for me, and I was so honored to carry on in the Emeritus status, and I'm working with Mark and the board on all kinds of stuff, and I also am really honored to support Amy Weaver, who's an amazing executive. Super proud that she's taken the baton. She's going to carry on with the stakeholder approach. She's extremely accomplished in the company, and I just think she's a terrific person, not only a terrific executive. So I feel really good about that as well.
Benioff described you as the foundation that Salesforce needed to scale. The foundation you're leaving is about 6 times larger than when you arrived. Talk a little bit about working with the company's chief legal counsel, Amy, and managing that transition.
When I look at any accomplishment, it's a team sport. And we've accomplished so much together as a leadership team, the ELT under Mark Benioff's great leadership. We've accomplished so much as nearly 60,000 employees. We have an outstanding finance team that gets lots of accolades externally, let alone internally. And Amy is a really accomplished executive. And so the way I think about the baton pass is back to sharing everything that I can share, answer all the questions that I can answer, be a soundboard in that way. And really, I come back to Josh, shipmate, self, and the ship is Salesforce, and the shipmate is Amy. And my view is, how do I help her, and how do I help all the executive team, the board, in that journey? And I'm just so honored to do it.
You serve on a few companies' board of directors. We've mentioned the role of a director a couple times in our conversation. What do you look for before you decide to accept a board position? And will that become more of your focus in Chapter 2?
Definitely. What I look for is back to kind of one of the questions you asked me earlier. It's around what's really important to you. Values are important to me. The people I surround myself are very important to me. I want to be with the best. I want to learn from the best. That has been my motto that's guided my career always, is be with the best, learn from the best, serve with the best possible capability. And so that's, to me, is important. I look at, obviously, the business opportunity, the companies, and, but certainly the people around that table are very, very important to me. I just would say that. But I also, pick areas where I want to learn something and where I can add value. The other thing that I will certainly, Josh, focus on is, being a strategic advisor, in very select situations, again, where I think I could add value. And I like to share, I like to serve, I like to learn. And, after 40 years, you pick up, having worked with some really iconic companies and people. I'm looking forward to sharing that. And then I'm going to do something, I'll do some investing, and I'll do, certainly with ESG, I will be helping. I'm a global ambassador for Accounting for Sustainability, and which is Prince Charles's initiative. And I really want to help on that topic to continue to elevate what I think is an important topic for all modern companies to consider. And by the way, every industry is different. Every fact and circumstance is different. We don't all have to do the same thing, but we all need to do something to try to help here. And I just want to, in a very pragmatic way, be of assistance in that way. And then lastly, it'll surprise you, but I'm writing a book with my 2 sons, and it's not about business. And it's something I and they have wanted to do, and we're kind of embarking on that. We've made some progress. And the title is Walk With My Sons. It's a three-way, three-author dialogue about what we've learned from each other. And the punchline is that I credit Laura for this, my wife, is that ever since, the beginning when we had children, it was like, you can work as late as you need to, but please have dinner with us. Mm-hmm. And then please take the kids for a walk. And if you can imagine, from when I had to hold them up when they're barely walking to now, one is 32 and one's 35, the first thing they want to do is go for a walk. And so you learn from each other. And so my chapter is going to be the biggest, the learning from them, but hopefully they have a few things to say too. And, we may not sell more than 5 or 6 copies, but it's not what it's about. It's about spending time with my sons. So that'll be a little different aspect of chapter 2.
I'm sure set for publication Father's Day 2022. Mark, I'm curious, beyond the writing work with your boys, have you begun to noodle any ideas for what's going to be on that list for 2022 that you're going to put into ink between Christmas and New Year?
That's a really thoughtful question. I tell you what I'm doing right now is I'm doing a V2 Mom, and a V2 Mom is it's a method of setting goals at Salesforce. And the V2 means there's 2 V's: V for vision and V for values. And then you put down, so I want to have the vision for chapter 2, which I have, and then the values has to be prioritized at Salesforce. You never present without having to be prioritized, or Mark will help you. Mark Benioff will help you prioritize. And then the methods are the key things that will get you to the vision. And then the O is for obstacles, be realistic of what's in your way. And then the metrics are how will you measure the success. So I have it on one piece of paper. I'm actually running it by Mark and a couple other mentors, and I'm fine tuning it. And the biggest reason I'm fine tuning it, and Josh, this has been an eye opener for me, is I always knew there was going to be opportunity in chapter 2, but there's even more opportunity than I thought, because I wasn't thinking about it quite like that. You're in a learning mode. And so now I'm trying to prioritize what is going to help me the most serve and achieve that for the good of my family and the good of the people that I serve. And so it's going to be fun. So I'm halfway through that. So I'm not quite ready to tell you on the penciled notes, but you should expect that I'll be, very present in the business community. And some people love to golf. And, I always joke around. I said, if you and I were to go golfing, Josh, I'd make you sign a non-disclosure agreement, but I love business. I, love what I do. I love to learn and participate. And so that's what I'm fine tuning right now. So give me another month or so and I'll have it fine tuned, but I've got a pretty good sketch of it right now.
Well, Mark, I hope when the book is ready, you and the boys will come back on the show and we'll do a 3-way with them and have a good conversation about what you guys all learned from each other on those many walks. Thanks so much for joining us inside the Ice House.
Josh, it's been a total pleasure. And thank you again for the great partnership with the New York Stock Exchange.
Thanks, Mark. And that's our conversation for this week. Our guest was Mark Hawkins, Salesforce's president and CFO Emeritus. Salesforce, NYSE ticker symbol CRM. If you like what you heard, please rate us on iTunes so other folks know where to find us. And if you've got a comment or a question you'd like one of our experts to tackle on a future show, email us at icehouse@ice.com or tweet at us at IceHousePodcast. Our show is produced by Pete Ash with production assistance from Ken Abel and Ian Wolf. I'm Josh King, your host, signing off from the library of the New York Stock Exchange. Thanks for listening.
Information contained in this podcast was obtained in part from publicly available sources and not independently verified. Neither ICE nor its affiliates make any representations or warranties, express or implied, as to the accuracy or completeness of the information and do not sponsor, approve, or endorse any of the content herein, all of which is presented solely for informational and educational purposes. Nothing herein constitutes an offer to sell, a solicitation of an offer to buy any security, or a recommendation of any security or trading practice. Some portions of the preceding conversation may have been edited for the purpose of length or clarity.